But actually, what I was actually going to talk about was humor for a minute here, or for a few minutes here. Swami Kriyananda was he was a wordsmith. He was a writer and a speaker and a poet and all these things. So he was very clever with words. And because all of Krishna's soldiers look like Krishna, the vibration of the community carries through. So many of us were very clever. And in another circumstance, Swami asked me a perfectly reasonable question, just a trivial question, and I answered with some sassy answer that made us both laugh. And for a second, I got really insecure. It's like, is this okay? You know, we're always turning, I was thinking of myself, I'm always turning it in another direction. He gave a very interesting answer. He said, to a certain extent, having a sense of humor is a spiritual quality, because the nature of humor, and we're talking about good, clean humor, not mean humor or downward pulling humor, is just to be able to look at a situation and then turn it just enough so that which becomes ordinary makes you laugh. And even laughter itself, there's a lot that's said about the healing power of laughter. I was thinking about it recently. When you start laughing, you're in the now. Now, how often is that told to us, that we should just be in the present, even to the extent that time itself is an illusion, and that when we stand in the center of our own reality, we realize that past and future doesn't exist. It's just ever-existing consciousness. And when you're really having a wholehearted laugh, one of the reasons you're able to laugh is that you have disconnected yourself from the past and you're not worried about the future. So there's a real profound quality in that, which is why Master's recipe for good health was to read one funny story a day. That's what he said. And I think Isha Das said this morning, I think it was you who said it, Anandamoyi Ma said, you should have one good belly laugh every day. But, you sort of take that as a positive thing, but why would that matter? It's because we let go. And instead of taking the whole thing so darn seriously, which includes ourselves, we just let it be. There was a Swami in India that Swami Kriyananda met in the late 50s when he was there. The Swami's name was Murk Ananda, and Ananda means bliss, and often a Swami's name would be bliss through, and then whatever the word is, yogananda means bliss through yoga, through union with God. Kriyananda means bliss. Actually, it was not a common name when he took it. Bliss through action, or bliss through the practice of Kriya meditation. But Kriya just means action. So Murk Ananda is bliss through silliness. The first thing I said to Swami when he told me was, there's a Sanskrit word for silly? And apparently there is. And when Swami met the man in a friendly sort of way, he said something like, that is a really odd name for a Swami. And the Swami said, you don't know me. Like, it's my right name. But really think about that. Because union from God, union with God, freedom, complete divine freedom, from not taking it so much to heart. No, that's not the right word. Not taking it so much to self. See, that's the whole thing, is that we're always thinking, Swamiji, thinking about ourselves. Swami Kriyananda had a wonderful habit of making fun of attitudes, constricting attitudes that were not helpful to us, making fun of them when no one was actually having that attitude, and exaggerating the humor of it to the extent that when you wanted to do it seriously, it was a little harder to do it seriously because you would remember how much humor there had been in it before. There's the last cookie, I want the last cookie, whatever it might be. And on the basis of that, sometimes when we've been traveling a lot, different things happen. And so one of my helpful mantras, because otherwise you might do it seriously, is, nobody cares about me but me. And just how often in our life Is that where we're going? Nobody cares about me but me, like this. So when we start talking again about the spiritual path, we need to have ways, we need to develop in our own understanding, do a little better than your worst. Nobody cares about me but me. Just anything that will help us to just lighten it up a little bit. Because, that's the realm. This is where Ananda, and last night I was talking, I think, about God, about people being atheists or not believing in God, and sometimes thoughts never get finished. But the other side of that, speaking of the Sanskrit language, is that there are countless synonyms for God in the Sanskrit language. And I'm not talking about Shiva and Brahma and Vishnu and Kali and Durga. Those are symbolic representations of living realities. I believe Swami was saying also that there is a certain tradition that that an individual jiva will play the part of those deities for a period of time. As Swami put it, just as there's always a king of England, but it's not always the same soul that's the king of England. Now, I'm way beyond my pay grade here, but isn't that interesting? That Shiva actually exists out there and somebody gets assigned to it for, an eternity or two. I don't know exactly. Your mind just kind of blanks a little. Which is to say there's much more subtle going on. As I was talking last night about Mother Durga sending the monkey to jump on me and teach me a little about her. Okay, but let me just think where I was going with that. Give me a minute. Oh, yes, but I was talking about synonyms, but I'm not talking about deities, symbolic deities or literal deities. So the synonyms in Sanskrit, Ananda, could actually be defined as the word God. But Ananda is not an abstraction in the same way. It's joy. But not the joy that's like, oh my God, I finally got the crying baby to stop crying, and now I can put my feet up and watch the rerun of the baseball game. I mean, that may be a relaxing thing to do, but that's not Ananda. Ananda is infinite bliss, ever new joy. The word Shanti, it means peace. Jesus called it the peace that passeth understanding, right? And Prem, which means love. But again, not the nobody cares about me but me kind of love, but infinite love. And so then when we start thinking about these things, we have much more concrete way to go. Now, in this context, I wanted to talk, and I'm going to introduce the subject. If you go to the YouTube channel that I have, you'll find many more on this subject. Well, we're talking about being both in tune with the divine and being an instrument for the divine. When we were talking about American politics, or just basically the condition of the planet, because we happen to live in this country, we're more aware of it than we are in other places. You don't see yourself as others see you. I happened to be in India, I believe at the time when whatever happened in Yugoslavia or somewhere in there, the USA started being militarily active somewhere. And because I was so far away, I was seeing it differently. Having lunch with an Indian friend, he said it like this: oh, you Americans, you're always at war with somebody. Just like that. And I thought, we aren't we? Just everybody has a part to play. And I'm not actually denigrating it, because a great deal of that willingness to defend principle is also has been the greatness of this country, to sacrifice for ideals. But there we are. We're always one thing or another. So one of the so talking about how to be a channel, what I was trying to say by that is, it's not always obvious, because we sometimes think that spirituality is just being nice, right? But it isn't. Spirituality isn't about being nice. It's about being truthful, and it's about expanding your particular consciousness, becoming more bigger, more balanced, and more everything of what you need to be. When I was a fairly harmonious person when I was younger. When I was about probably 19, I guess, in that period of time, I realized that the harmony of my personality was not because I was harmonious, but the core issue was that I was afraid of conflict. So you put out this thing that looks nice, but it's not actual nice. It's actually fear, manifesting, masquerading as nice. And I began to understand the real quality of consciousness and the quality of the chakras, and I realized this is not progress. Now, most of my life I've lived in California. When this realization came to me, and I speak to my New York City friend here, I happened to be spending the summer in New York. And I realized that I needed to get over my fear of conflict. And being in New York City is an extremely good place to get over it, because what is considered normal there is considered quite horrifying to me. You know, fighting for the taxi, being the first in line. The grocer, just as sort of as a game with his employees, would try to put his thumb on the scale and charge you a little more. And I had to learn just to speak up, that's all. I had to learn to not be nice, because nice was fear. I had to get over the fear. So I started being feisty, you know, because it was not horrifying in New York City to do it. Everybody just smiled at you when you did it. My taxi, get behind me, you know, get your thumb off the scale, that sort of energy. I got really good at it. Then I began to enjoy it. And I realized I had crossed the line. This was now what had been expansive, was now no longer expansive. Now it had become contractive. It had become something else. And see, this is also what we have to understand about the spiritual path. It is not linear. It is not that we all line up here and some are ahead and some are behind and we all end up over there. It's like, I think, like the flight of a bumblebee. You know, it just, you don't know, because you have to be who you are, and you have to be able to move toward, well, what you were really moving toward is the center. But because we're all arrayed on the rim of the wheel, literally, if you're north of center, you go south. If you're south of center, you go north. In Life of Ramakrishna, the great avatar who lived at the end of the 1800s, and he was kind of, well, I started to say kooky. He was so extreme in the way he behaved that some people knew he was an avatar and some thought he was just a lunatic. You know, after they're dead and they're not really contradicting you anymore, we get a kind of unified picture that is positive. But the actual realities are much more challenging. So some people thought to follow him was a sign of great spiritual intuition, and others thought to follow him was to be involved with a lunatic. So his temple, where he lived, the Kali temple in Dakshineshwar, which was near Calcutta, people would come to it on this ferry boat. So his disciples would get on the boat in Calcutta, come down to the temple, get off at the Ghat, and go see their guru there. So one disciple is coming on the boat, and when the passengers begin to realize that the other passengers begin to realize that this man is going to see Ramakrishna, some loudmouth starts talking about what a lunatic this guy is, and you must be crazy. Nobody with a brain would follow this man, and everything that people could say. So the disciple decided, you know, they can say anything they like, but I have to be harmonious, and I will just sit here, om, 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 and just let this man rail. So he gets off the boat, he goes up the Ghat, and Ramakrishna is there. Ramakrishna is holding up his dhoti, and he's sobbing, and he's sobbing, and he's saying, those people spoke so badly against me, and nobody defended me. Like this. Okay. The rest of the story. Another disciple's coming down on the same boat. Some other loudmouth passenger starts saying, you know, you're a fool. No, only idiots would follow that crazy man. This man is a great big man with a lot of fire. It's a small boat. He begins to rock the boat like this. And he announces that unless you take back everything you said against my guru, I'm going to sink this boat and we're all going to drown, you know, and he's yelling like this. Finally, the man's quiet. He gets off, he comes up to God, and Ramakrishna says, "What do you care what those fools think? Just let them say whatever they want." North of center, you go south. South of center, you go north. What we're trying to come into is that point of perfect balance within ourselves. We live, this is an interesting picture about time, if you can picture this. We live on the rim. And we just, past is behind us, future is in front of us. And because we're way out here on the rim, we can maybe see a little bit behind us and a little bit in front of us. But the center, of the center of the wheel, the rim spins like this. But, the center can be actually even motionless because it just spins around it. Spirituality is as we move to the center. And when you think about it, as you move from the rim toward the center, your vision widens, doesn't it? And you begin to understand the past, and you begin to anticipate the future. There was a time when the community that I live in is actually an apartment complex, and when we don't own it, but when we first started leasing it, there were other people living in it, and only gradually did we shift it. And there was one Saturday morning, the apartment I was living in was right near where the cars were parked. Saturday is people's day off. At 7 a.m, one of the neighbors pulled his car up right outside, virtually my bedroom window, turned on the radio really loud and started working on his car. Like I'm the only person on the planet and I can just do whatever I want and my actions have no effect. Now, I didn't know the man and he didn't stay with us long, but it was like I can just see him being totally confused when people disregarded his well-being because he had no consciousness of consequences of past and future. But when you move out closer to the center, you begin to intuit your past karma. You even may remember your past lives. You begin to see how to change the future. And here's an interesting part about that. When Swami was a child, this was one of his earliest memories. He writes about this in his autobiography, The New Path. He said, when he was a child, and probably a baby even actually, he said when he would close his eyes to go to sleep, he would see this enormous light. And he would focus on that light, and that light would gradually expand until he was absorbed into it. And that was how he went to sleep. And he said, of course, as a child, he thought everyone went to sleep that way. And only about the age of 9 is when he began to understand that he was living in a different world than most people. And he, for the next, until he met Master when he was 22, he made a greater effort to integrate into this world, which failed completely, fortunately, but he at least tried. But here was also what was interesting. Swami rarely talked about his own spiritual realization, but this was in a talk he was giving. He sort of backed himself into it. He said, because of his concern after the age of 9, he gradually stopped falling asleep that way. He met Master, he was initiated into Kriya, he began to meditate, and he went back to that spot. It's a state of superconsciousness. And what he said was so interesting. It was the same moment, because there's no time in superconsciousness. And he said all of a sudden he was back exactly where he had been when he used to fall asleep as a child, which just takes all of our concepts and just throws them into the ocean. What do we really know? But isn't it magnificent to contemplate? And we're so caught. I realize I'm changing themes here and I may never come back to the other one. But, oops, now I lost the thought. Just give me a second here to find it again. Oh, yes. Master said something extremely interesting. He said, because one thing follows another, as long as we're living in the realm of time, there's a sequence of events, we make the mistake of thinking that one thing is caused by another. Now, of course we just think so. I'm walking down the street or whatever it might be, something happens, you go sequentially like this. And I've contemplated that for a while to try to understand it more deeply. This is about, we're going to karma now for a few minutes here. This is the understanding of, let me think how to say it right. It would never happen to you. Oh, I know where I'll take this from. Sometimes people get initiated into Kriya, and soon after they get initiated into Kriya, things begin to happen. And so one thing which I will speak against is sometimes disciples think they're being helpful, saying, oh boy, well, you take Kriya, then your life will really fall apart. You know, like taking Kriya causes all this to happen. And so this friend was talking to me, an acquaintance was talking to me. They'd been like 2 weeks after initiation into Kriya, and they were very freaked out because all this karma had started coming forward, and much of it was challenging. And I said, honey, you've had Kriya for 14 days. You do 12 Kriyas in the morning and 12 at night, or 14 in the morning and 14 at night. You overrate your power. That's all I can say. You do not have the power to create all that karma in 14 days with 14 Kriyas. You just can't. But what actually happens, far from Kriya causing the catastrophe, is that Divine Mother had enough sympathy on you to give you Kriya before the karma came out anyway. You know, and everything that happens to us, even if somebody seems to catalyze it, so-and-so makes you really angry, you get hit by a car, you know, your business goes bankrupt, a fire burns your house down. I mean, you can name all the others, and even good things, why not? But we always think of the hard things. It's like it was ripe to happen. And it was building up for a very long time, just a very long time, and now it came forward. The way I think about this, and this is the question you asked about forgiveness, this is also an element of that. People participate in your karma, but they do not cause it. It's caused by the necessity for the energy to find expression so we can experience whatever it has to teach us. And that may involve other people, but it would never happen just because of them. It would only happen if you were called together, because their participation will help the karma itself to come forward. And this is one of the ways in which we just stop being concerned about who was in the room when it happened, or even the words that they said, or the 40 years that they lived with you before they turned into such a unfortunate person. Swami Kriyananda had this marvelous way. He was very frank. He never hesitated just to call things what they were. He didn't feel that he always had to be sweet about things. But the love that he had for people and the respect was so deep that it was all right. I remember this one situation, this person who was with us for a little period of time, very, very insecure. And because of that, was not always easy. And someone sympathetically said, oh, I wish so-and-so had more confidence in their personality. Swami said, please, the only thing that makes them bearable is they have no confidence in that personality. But Swami did everything he possibly could to help that person. But part of what enabled him to help was that he could just, this is what it is. This is what we're working with. So when we're just able, so I was starting to say, he used to say about people, and I love this phrase, yes, so-and-so does have an unfortunate manner, was how he would put it, you know, an unfortunate manner. Unfortunate because it causes grief for them, causes grief for us. That's just the way it is. But the fact that you or I or someone reacts to that energy has nothing to do with that person. It only has to do with, why does this strike me? Actually, there was I'm going to speak about myself. There was a little Instagram recording that my friend made, and one of the things, my friend who helps me with that channel, helps me, what am I saying? Who makes that channel happen? I know like nothing. But what I was working with, because Swami said this to us once, so it was so vivid. He said, if somebody says something critical to you, and you react to the fact of being criticized, that means there's something that activates a resistance in you. That doesn't mean that anything that a person said was true. It just means that something in you is not at peace, and they catalyze that response. And the example he gave, which was so interesting, is that if somebody says something to you that has no truth at all, like, I've figured it out. Everyone thinks you're an earthling, but I know you're not an earthling. You're really from another planet, and you're here to steal our scientific secrets. You don't say, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Here's my birth certificate. I'm an earthling. Because nothing in it resonates. Right. But if you react, which is to say, if it disturbs your peace, it's because there's some truth there. And the truth, again, may have nothing to do with what they've said. Vulnerability, insecurity, whatever it is, tendency to try to expunge that which you don't enjoy. Swami was describing someone's unfortunate manner. So-and-so has a tendency to want to expunge anyone who ignores her, or displeases her. Just like get rid of it instead of looking at myself. And so this is how karma is perpetuated. This is how the lesson comes, and we don't learn it. We define it externally, we don't understand. Or we have the wrong definition of spirituality itself. It's to live by what is true and to do that which will move us closer to the truth, whatever that might be. And this, I'm going back to my original theme. When Master was trying to express to us, and I was talking about being a channel for the divine, being in tune with the divine, Master talked about 8 manifestations of spirit. And this is a tradition, but however, wherever it comes from, whatever it's about, these are 8 vibrations that the divine expresses in this world. And I'll say them out to you. It's love, joy, peace, calmness, power, wisdom, light, and sound. Okay, love, joy, peace, calmness, power, wisdom, light, and sound. Now, you can see they're widely varied, aren't they? They're all different ways of expressing the interesting issue of peace and calmness being 2 and not the same thing. Oftentimes these days, because we know so much about sports and sports heroes, when the basketball player in the last 3 seconds takes the ball all the way down the court and then makes the 3-point shot and the whole place goes crazy, peace is not the first word that comes to mind when you think about that. But the player may tell you he was oblivious to everything. He knew where the ball was, he knew where the basket was. He was utterly calm in the middle of that. And a hero on the battlefield often will just streak across a place where everybody's trying to kill him with a bomb or a gun. And there's nothing. He just is going where he's going. He's absolutely calm. Peace, of course, is the absence of conflict, the absence of chaos, which also can be entirely internal. All of these can be so. So besides doing a little better than your worst, the 8 manifestations of God are extremely helpful for us to know either what we ought to do or what it is possible for us to do in this moment. And it also makes much more specific the idea of how to be a channel of God, how to be in tune. Because if you make it anything external, you don't really have access to it. But if we keep each of these options in our mind, in any circumstance where we're confused or out of balance or a little bit agitated, you ask yourself, which of these manifestations is accessible to me in this moment? And a lot of times, joy is not an option. It's just not an option. I was talking to you last night about, or I think it was last night, or maybe it was this morning, when I was talking about having become extremely annoyed with someone in a very public place, the last straw. So I'm saying to myself, Christ-like love, even though I loved this person, love was not an option. Definitely not an option. Power was something I would consider, especially the power of sound, manifested as a very loud, annoyed voice at that point. Not a good idea. Accessible to me, definitely, but not a good idea. So I worked a little bit on calmness. Just like, if this has to be settled, it doesn't have to be settled now. And I was working hard on wisdom. Like, is this a good idea? No, this is a terrible idea. Let's not do that. And you will find, if you can fix these ideas in your mind, that you can always be a channel for a divine vibration. And from the story about Ramakrishna's two disciples, you can also see that it depends on which side of center you're on. Sometimes a powerful sound, which is your own voice expressing a powerful feeling, may be exactly what's required at that point. The masters were not always nice. We always think about the most dramatic example in Jesus' life, although I doubt if it was the only one, was picking up the whip and driving the money changers out of the temple. He was probably perfectly calm in that moment, but he was not creating peace. He was creating extraordinary conflict, but he was acting from love. I doubt if he was joyful about it, though, in the sense that it's heartbreaking for the masters. Their hearts break when they see us. That's really like it is. When they see us acting in such a way that the consequences for us will be very difficult. Swami talked about once Master was visibly weeping. And, when the disciples asked him, he said because he knew that a certain one of the disciples was going to leave the spiritual path. And Master could see the suffering that was going to come to him, and he was aware of that suffering. He felt it. I was with Swamiji once in Disneyland. Swami was in Los Angeles for 14 years when he was part of Self-Realization Fellowship. He really enjoyed Disneyland. Disneyland has become different now, but earlier it was entirely separate from popular culture. Now it's integrated a lot of popular culture. But then it was a complete, literally the magical kingdom created on a wholly different template than the rest of the world. No, popular culture wasn't there. And Swamiji also liked it because it was so well done. He would take us there to see what real good karma yoga looked like, because everything was so carefully and consciously and energetically taken care of. So from time to time, Swami would do programs in Los Angeles, and usually a carload of us would go down with him to man the book table or really just to be there. One of those times there was about 15 of us living in somebody's 2-bedroom apartment, we were all sleeping on mats on the floor. We didn't have money for hotels or anything like that. And it was a pretty arduous journey, went on for several days. And one girl was asked, well, how are you doing? Oh, very well, she said. I just finished my morning meditation and I was sure it was my night meditation. Meaning I was ready for bed and it's actually the beginning of the day. Otherwise, we're fine. But at the end of one of those trips, Swamiji took us to Disneyland, which was just like we'd spent an extra day there. There were at least 15 of us. And he was very knowledgeable about it. And he knew all the different things he wanted us to do. And we would run after him, literally like little goslings following the goose. Sometimes we actually held hands in order to sort of not lose each other. Somebody insisted on going on one of those big roller coasters, which was not on Swami's itinerary. He went on the roller coaster ride, and when he got off, all he said was, why? Perfect answer. And then we went on. But somewhere in the midst of that, at that time, I doubt if they do this now. I haven't been there in decades. When it got to be sunset, they had what they called the electric parade, which was super high tech for the time, which is the Disney characters in costume would have little lights, on their costumes, and so it would be the electric parade. It sounds so primitive now. Probably it's holographic images walking down the street. I don't know. But in order to be there for it, we sort of wanted a good seat. So we all gathered on the sidewalk a little bit early. And all of a sudden, because this is what would happen with him, which happens with souls whose consciousness is expanded, above, a certain spiritual mood came over him. What he said was amazing. We're surrounded by hundreds of people, and vividly in my mind is this Japanese couple with a little baby in a stroller, and the Japanese couple has a little Japanese baby. That's the way it usually happens. So it just was not just a little bit farther away from my own experience, especially then. And Swami just sort of looks out over this crowd like this, but you could tell from his eyes what he was seeing was different. He said, imagine not merely loving all these people, but actually being all these people as much as you are yourself. And then he said, that's the consciousness of Master. And it's really like, it takes the goalposts and moves them to infinity, is what it really does. We think we're so good because we're a little bit nice sometimes. But imagine being as much in anybody's reality as you are, and you're knowing their story, feeling their heartbeat. There's a story of Lahiri Mahashaya in one of his, he sat in his living room and meditated 24 hours a day after he retired from his work. And once he began to cry out, I'm drowning, I'm drowning. And later they found out that a ferry boat had sunk off the coast of Japan. He's sitting in a house in Varanasi, and for some reason or another, he was just experiencing the fact that they were drowning. The other part of this is we think we are alone, but we are never alone. We are constantly surrounded by angels and angelic forces and divine teachers who are not limited by time or space or by there's too many of us. Omnipresence. So we're there in Disneyland. Swami's telling us imagine being these people. And I always think of that couple and their Japanese baby, because somehow some part of me tried to understand their reality at that moment. And we were so shifted by the energy that he was in that we just sat down on the sidewalk to meditate. And so this whole little square on the sidewalk of, meditating yogis, and we were gone. I don't know where we were, but we were not there. So about a half an hour later, Mickey Mouse is walking in front of us, Yeah, we woke up to Mickey Mouse. I don't know what the people around us thought, because by that time we were surrounded by people and we're just sitting there on the sidewalk meditating. But the other part of what I'm trying to say here is you don't go anywhere to become spiritual. It's like the little apple seed does not go to the apple tree store to get the equipment to become an apple tree. It merely energizes, awakens, and the actual word you want is allows. It allows that destiny to be fulfilled. And this is the question to all of us, because this is what we're working with all the time. One part of us wants it, and one part of it is afraid of it. Or afraid, I was in a store once, and it was an educational toys store. I don't know what brought me into it. And there was a mother in there, and she was the kind of mother who would shop in an educational toys store. And she was very, she had a very clear idea of the developmental next step of her child and began to search for it or whatever it was. However, she took her eyes off the child who was with her. And during the time that she had her eyes off the child selected his own toy without reference to all the plans the mother had. So, of course, the child has become quite attached to his toy. So now the mother is in a bit of a conflict. So she has the one she wants him to take, and he has the one that he's already chosen, which bears no relationship to anything at all. It's just the one he got his hands on. Because what does he know? The child doesn't know anything at that point about what's in the box. So the mother starts doing oh, look at this one, look at the pretty pictures, look at the things that we'll do. I've never raised children, but I have in other lifetimes, so I know what the story is. You're trying to persuade. She's doing pretty well. He's beginning to, kind of lessen his grip on this one, and then bless her, the mother's heart, she got impatient. And she tried to pull it out of his hands, which is, of course, a catastrophe to do. Suddenly it became the most important thing in the world to him, and there was absolutely no chance that he would ever let it go. So the whole thing ended about as badly as it could end, with the child screaming and the toy on the ground and, the whole thing like that. Guess what I'm about to say? We're like that. We're children, and we've made it up. A friend of mine was speaking recently, and he slipped and fell flat on his back and hit his head on a tile floor, and didn't break his skull, fortunately, but had an injury to his brain that went on for a while, months or maybe even a year or two. And he said during that time, he's a deep yogi. During that time, he said, the wires got scrambled, and he would have the most unusual thoughts, just strange thoughts that he didn't know were strange, or that it was hard to tell they were strange because they were his thoughts. And he had to develop some kind of a mechanism because the normal process of reason wouldn't work. And so on the spiritual path, and this is something that is very dear to me and also to him, well, let me go back just a second. When Swami first was with Yogananda, he read Autobiography of a Yogi. 1 week later, he was living in the ashram, and it was a disciple and a monk. And he had never even heard about any of these things before all that happened. So he said sometimes it was all so much for him that he was literally dizzy and he would have to sit down. And the ashram, more than the history is presented to us, was chaotic, because the master could hold all kinds of people with his magnetism. So it was much less orderly and tidy than it has become later. So people would propound all kinds of preposterous ideas, but Swamiji said that everything sounded so strange to him that it was hard for him to tell which preposterous ones were true and which ones were just preposterous. So he would always have to say, did Master say that? And then no matter how far out it seemed to him, if Master said it, then he would have to, at least he couldn't reject it. If he couldn't accept it, he couldn't reject it. But if it was something that they got out of another book or were just making up, he didn't have to take it seriously. So my friend, when his brain was getting confused, he started treating his own brain this way. When it would give him a thought, he would say, who said that? Meaning, what is the source? How do I know that that's true? Who said that? I loved that. We say, I'm not loved, these people don't like me, I've made a mistake, now I'm doomed, I'm old, nobody wants me. When I was 50, there's a lot of women in this room, so I'll tell you this. When I was 50, for about a couple of years, my hair started looking really bad, right? And I started, every time I got a haircut, I got a new hairdresser. Because the only possible explanation could be that I had a bad haircut, right? And finally, I got to the hairdresser who said, honey, everything gets old. Just like that, including your hair, like that. Because reality was right in front of me, which is, and why am I surprised? What amazed me was that I noticed, and what really embarrassed me was that I cared. Like, how many times have I gotten old and died? How many times has my hair gotten old? How many times has my face changed? Dambara has an aunt who was part of our world, and by the time she was about 60 or so, she'd gained a little weight, and, things changed. And she was so feisty, I loved her. She said, her name was Margie. She said, I just had to accept that Margie's never going to be young, slim, and beautiful again. It's like that. This is just the way it is. Who said that? Who said that we could not be different? And that's what, is this the truth? Sometimes when people would ask me, who is Swami to me? The word I love, and this is also wonderful in the Christian tradition, is the word pole star. Do you know what a pole star is? Pole star is the unchanging point of light. And that's how they used to navigate across the seas before all the things that we have now. You would find the pole star. And then you could tell what was true and what wasn't true. And even if you're wandering away from it, you still knew. That's what Master's teachings, that's what Swami's consciousness is for us, was the presence of God, Christ, God, Guru. It's the pole star. It's the unchanging reality around which everything else is measured. Think how much difference that makes. Just remember that. Measure everything by it, even if you have to say, which I have often said, well, Jyotish's son, when he was about 7 or 8, there was something going on in the school, and some boy treated him really badly, and he was really mad about it. And he came home and he explained to Jyotish and Devi about what this boy and what he did. And being very good parents, they just let him say what he wanted. But then that night when he was going to sleep, Jyotish starts talking to him, and because it was a community and we knew everything about each other, you know, Jyotish knew what was going on in the family, which was making the child upset. And so he was trying to get his son to think beyond himself, to have sympathy for this boy's problems and so on like that. And his son, being very astute, understood completely, and he listened to his daddy and he heard what he had to say. And then he said, "Daddy, I don't want to be that good." It wasn't even a question of whether he could. I don't want to be that good. You know, we had the question about prayer this morning. That's a very honest answer. There was a period of time in my life when I was tempted to do things that I really knew were not what God wanted of me. But every morning at the end of my meditation, I said to Master, if you give me the slightest opening, I'm going to run through it. So the only way we're going to get through this day is that if you keep the door slammed against my wrong desires. And I want to tell you now, if that door is closed, I'm going to beat against it and be really upset with you. You know, but now this is what I want. And I'll be darned if every darn day that door remained closed. You know, the Divine Mother had to get that thing out of my hand. And while she was trying to take it, I was trying to hold on to it. But you just keep going with honesty, and the potential is in you. We are an apple seed, we will become an apple tree. We have faith like a mustard seed, we will become the great tree. People ask me all the time, what is the secret of the spiritual path? Really, really simple. 2 words, don't quit. Period. I've lived long enough to see that that is all that matters. Yeah. I came young, I'm not so young. I was sitting with my friend Nitai at one point, and gosh, Nitai had gotten old. I don't know how that happened. But all of a sudden, really, tears are going down my face. It's going to get me again. Nitai, we were young when we came, we're old, and we're still here. That's victory, my friends.